Heyo, what's up? I'm recovering from a bad flu. Thought I'd try to sum up some simple stuff that nobody gets, and by not getting, I mean they really don't get it. I got a couple examples below, but you can find examples if you compare them side by side with basically any full-frame camera versus any DX crop sensor camera. Here we've got a 24 megapixel Fuji X Pro 2. And here's the Nikon D3, but I actually did the testing on to the other 24 megapixel full frame Nikon D750, but also the D7100, which is a 24 megapixel DX crop sensor from Nikon. I thought, for sake of charity, I thought I'd bring up the YouTube videos from a few professional photographers and why they were recommending full frame over crop sensor. And the number one on YouTube was a guy. He had some medium formats and some full-frame Canons laid out there, and he proceeded to give some optical reasoning as far as why you would want to shoot full-frame versus DX. And of course, he was valid on much of that, but he really had no answer for why a full-frame shot, especially in portraiture, which is really where it's very important, is better than a DX. And these people don't know the answer. And, he did mention things like compression, lens compression. You actually have, increasing or decreasing compression as you go from, telephoto to wide angle, which is the reason why, for example, like on a Fuji or any DX crop sensor, whereas the equivalent 85 millimeter, 55, 56 millimeter is not going to give you the same bokeh. It's not going to give you the same compression as far as a person's face and how it's rendered, because a 56 millimeter is a 56 millimeter is a 56 millimeter. It's not an 85 millimeter. You can get the same thing by slapping the 85 millimeter with an adapter onto the DX crop sensor, but then you got an issue that, of course, that it's been cropped out, so you're going to have to back up, and that creates another whole set of issues. So there is that aspect. The other aspect, like I said, check the samples below. And I just wanted to get to the nitty-gritty on this because nobody explains this and nobody understands it. Well, a few people do, but not that I've ever seen anybody mention in any photography magazine, which I don't read, by the way, or any YouTube video. Because, let's be honest, the YouTube photographers, well, some of them, do a lot of gear reviews and stuff, or some of them do a lot of photography. Nobody can cover it all in photography. Nobody can. It's just a huge subject. It's like, it's like talking about, being a driver of a car. You can be a race car driver, or you could be a totally different type of driver. And, one area doesn't mean you're an expert in the other area. Photography is just enormous. But when it comes to photo sites, what does it actually mean? There is an aspect of photography where we're talking about native gain. I've already mentioned, of course, that ISO is neither sensitivity nor is it exposure. It's absolutely not. It's applied gain. We have native gain vis-a-vis your sensor, and we have gain so far as the speed of the lens and obviously the shutter speed. Okay, well, we've got ISO, which is not exposure. Then we have, of course, your aperture, and then we have your shutter speed. There is another gain, and it's native, and it can't be changed, unlike your lenses, which of course you can change, and your shutter speed, which of course you can change. There is a gain that is native, and once the camera's made, that's the way it is. And it usually equates out to a stop or hair over stop of exposure. And that is photosite or pixel pitch. Now, it is the case that you can't, for example, say, well, if it's a stop off, and I'm not talking about the Fuji, which does have 3/4 of a stop compensation differential on the ISO versus other cameras, but just all things being equal, which they never really are, you can't raise the exposure up. You're going to blow your highlights. So even if you overexpose by stop, you can't correct for this, and you're going to blow your highlights on a Fuji or a Nikon D7100. But you do have a stop, and you take a look at the pictures below of inner tonal gain meaning your local contrast, not your global contrast, but your local contrast. And these are the values that give you the depth and rendition. Saying you're using a really good lens, for example. If you're using a crappy lens, you may not notice at all. Most people don't even notice on a really excellent lens. Take a look at the pictures below. The easiest way to see it, you know, I used to look at the 3D images that you'd have to unfocus your eyes to be able to see through. You'd actually see the image pop out if you'd actually focus through the picture. The 3D printed images, the magic eye images, I believe that they're called. If you actually unfocus your eyes and concentrate on the circular shell, it's called a sundial shell, and they're right there, you'll actually see it. The images on the DX crop sensor will look flat. They won't look like they actually have dimension, that it's actually coming out. You notice that there's a conical shape coming out of the image. And of course, it's a two-dimensional image, but so is a hologram, for God's sakes. So where is the dimensionality coming from? It's that intertonal dimension that is not rendered because the actual gain per unit of time, G over T, gain over time, is superior on the DX pixel pitch. This is why, even though this is a 24 megapixel camera, I'm not talking about Fuji, this could be the Nikon D7100, for example. This is why, for example, you could actually, I would prefer, for portraiture, flat out, you know, I'm not going to be cropping it. I'm going to be shooting under controlled conditions, and the max I'm going to be printing is 20 by 30. So I'm not going to be doing any cropping, and I want the best looking portraiture using an awesome lens. I would be using the Nikon D3 at 12 megapixels over this modern beauty, the Fujifilm X Pro 2 at 24 megapixels. Really? Yeah, the answer is really. For FX photo sites, it's perfect, the absolute best for portraiture. Certainly for bokeh, you have issues with bokeh because 56 millimeters of 56 millimeter is not, even though it's an equivalent at crop of 85 millimeter, it's not an 85 millimeter. That's why, you know, even a Fuji 56 millimeter f1.2, which I happen to have, is not going to render the same bokeh, nor the same facial compression of an 85 millimeter Zeiss at f1.4, or whatever aperture that I actually choose to use. It's just not. I can take that Zeiss lens and stick it on this, but I'm going to have to back up, obviously so. Creates another whole situation of issues. The DX camera, for example, has more detail per millimeter given the correct exposure. So what would I choose a DX crop sensor for versus an FX crop sensor? For telephoto work, for nature, if I know I'm going to be cropping the piss out of my shot, a little bird, you know, way the hell off there, I'm going to be cropping it to get on the bird. Even though I'm using a 400 millimeter lens, either on this one or this one, still going to be cropping the hell out of the shot. There's more translational information per square millimeter on the sensor here than there is here on a D750. Flat out. There's just more information. Bigger sensors, I've done so many videos on this, I don't even want to get into it again. Bigger sensors don't gather more light. Okay? The luminal intensity per square millimeter that falls on that sensor is the same. However, what is different is larger photo sites, regardless of the fact that there is improved SNR firmware, has greater gain over the same unit of time. What would I use a FX camera for in its pixel pitch, whether the D750 or even this old D3 or the D700? For portraiture, for bokeh, for human facial compression. So this is exactly how a Nikon D3 can indeed look better than a shot from a 24 megapixel DX sensor. Like I said, check the black and white. The reason I converted the shots below in the links to black and white is so that you're not influenced by the color. By taking away the coloring, you're actually able to see the true tonality and the difference in how it's rendered. That's why even, you know, some of the best hardcore shooters are like, I know you shoot full frame sensor, but why do you prefer a full frame? They really can't tell you. If you put them on the spot, we'll say, because it looks better. Okay, well that's a description though. That's not an explanation. Explain to me why it looks better. Well, this is the reason why it does look better. All of those little intertonals. This is why one of my serious pieces of testing tool is this gnarly piece of driftwood. There are a lot. If you illuminate this with some incident illumination, you'll have all these, especially if you render it in black and white, you'll have all these little tonalities where you're actually able to see the performance of a lens, but it'll also let you be able to see the performance of a sensor. Those little photo sites. The question remains is that everything in the Earth is trade-off? Everything in the universe is a trade-off. At what point in time do you ask yourself, you want to trade off a high megapixel camera and a small sensor that's destroyed gain over time and ruined the depth and micro contrast versus, a lower megapixel camera like the new Nikon D5 is only a 20 megapixel camera. D750 is only 24. Larger photo sites, better gain over a period of time, captures those intertonal values that gives the micro contrast and the three-dimensional rendering to the image. That is if the lens is exquisite to begin with. You can have a full-frame sensor with awesome photo site game. If you got a crappy lens on it, then you kind of defeated the purpose, which is why nobody should ever buy crappy lenses. That doesn't mean awesome lenses are incredibly expensive. They usually are, but I've shown you a lot of examples of really awesome lenses that are actually very cheap. So this is the actual secret, and it's not that it's a secret that anybody's hiding it from anybody. Most of the secrets in the universe aren't secret because they're kept away from people. It's that they're a secret is because people just are ignorant of the facts. People are busy, they run around, doing stuff, and they're too busy paying bills and making, it's good to know stuff. That way you can make the proper intellectual decisions based upon the facts. Central subject enlargement yields a faster loss of detail in a full frame, for example. Obviously, I'm taking the best part of a lens on a full-frame sensor, but I also have issues in that, this isn't an issue, that I don't have to blow the image as much up on a full-frame sensor raw file as I do the DX. However, the central subject, if I'm going to crop the hell out of it, I'd rather shoot a DX crop sensor. But in portraiture, unless you have an issue getting close in, that's not an issue because, if I'm taking portraiture shots, even with this low megapixel camera, D700, D3, I've got full control of the situation. I'm framing everything, and I'm really not going to crop that much at all in post. I'll tweak some of the values with some of the sliders in Lightroom, but people have been printing out since this camera came out in 2008, gigantic 20 by 30 prints, and everybody's been happy. What's changed in 8 years? And the answer is really nothing. Nothing has changed. The demand for print size and quality has remained the same. Things have gotten better in SNR firmware. We've got a lot more buttons, a lot more unique feature, vibration control, all sorts of neat little stuff, but the demands for the actual end product have not really changed that much in overall. In specificity, in certain arenas it has changed, but for 95% of professional photography and 100% of advanced amateur photography, it hasn't changed. Unless you're a person that likes to, crop the hell. If you're a bird photographer, this is the reason that bird photographers with $20,000 lenses are using DX crop sensor cameras. There's a reason for that. There's more translational information there. So there's a trade-off. I've got a lot more megapixels here than I do here, but I also have much better gain over the same unit of time here as I do here. And that means those intertonal values is why. And this is a fact, okay? You can ask 95% of professional portrait photographers, have you used full frame crops? I have used both. Well, which do you use? Well, for portraiture, I use full frame. I wouldn't use anything else other than the full frame. All of that's valid. Then you have to do is ask them why. Well, why? Well, it's because it looks better. Well, that's a description. What about the explanation? I don't know why, it just looks better. They don't know, but I just got done telling you why. A native gain exists. Okay, larger photo sites still matter. The same reason that we've improved SNR firmware in radio signal, using certain signal pass filters in radio. Still, an antenna with much better gain is going to receive a better signal. Difference between the ratio between your signal and your noise is enormous. Smaller photo site, not so much. And the intertonal values, which are weak to begin with, because the intertonal values are what is lost between, one tonal value to another. Those intertonals are lost because the gain is so much less on the smaller photo sites than it is on larger photo sites. That is the reason why port is not just due to focal length and crop and compression. It's actually due to a native gain factor. Native means once it's made in the camera, that's the way it is, native, okay? You obviously know about adjusting your shutter speed. You obviously know about adjusting your aperture. Well, there's another gain you obviously cannot adjust, and that's the gain that is the photo size, the larger pixel pitch versus the smaller one. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you later, okay?